In the NFL, nothing ever stays stable for too long, and every season proves that even the biggest names in the league can wake up one day and find their entire situation completely changed. That is exactly the kind of storm surrounding Kirk Cousins right now. A veteran quarterback who has spent years building a reputation for being reliable, experienced, and capable of leading an offense at a high level, yet suddenly finding himself at the center of one of the most talked about storylines in football. For a long time, his move to the Atlanta Falcons was seen as a major step, a chance for the franchise to finally bring in a steady presence at quarterback, someone who could reduce uncertainty and push the team toward real playoff contention. At the beginning, everything looked promising on paper, and many believed this partnership could finally bring balance to an offense that had been searching for identity for years. But as the games unfolded, reality started to look very different from expectations. Injuries began to interrupt rhythm, timing with receivers was not always perfect, and the overall consistency that Atlanta was hoping for started to fade in and out from week to week. In the NFL, that kind of inconsistency doesn't just create frustration, it creates pressure from every direction, from coaches, from fans, from analysts, and most importantly, from inside the organization itself. As that pressure grew, conversations behind the scenes slowly started to shift away from short-term fixes and more toward long-term planning. Every franchise reaches a moment where it has to decide whether to continue building around a current quarterback or start preparing for a new direction. And in Atlanta, that conversation became more serious as the season progressed. It wasn't loud at first. There were no public statements or dramatic announcements. But inside the building, the questions were there. Is this the right long-term answer at quarterback? Is the system working the way it was expected to work? And if not, what comes next? These are the kinds of questions that don't stay private forever in the NFL. Because eventually, rumors begin to leak, discussions begin to spread, and the entire league starts paying attention. That is exactly what happened here. Once the first reports and whispers started to surface, the situation immediately became more intense. Because when a veteran quarterback with Kirk Cousins' profile becomes part of uncertainty, other teams start to watch closely. At the same time, on the other side of the league, the Las Vegas Raiders were dealing with their own ongoing problem, one that has followed them for years, finding long-term stability at the quarterback position. The Raiders have tried different options, different styles, different personalities under center, but the missing piece has always been the same: consistency and leadership that can immediately raise the level of the entire offense.
In a division as competitive as the AFC West, where every game feels like a battle, not having a stable quarterback situation becomes a major disadvantage. So when the possibility of Kirk Cousins becoming available started to circulate, it immediately caught attention inside the Raiders organization. Unlike younger, unproven prospects, Cousins brings years of starting experience, playoff appearances, and a track record of running structured offenses at a high level. He is not a developmental project. He is a ready-to-go option for a team that wants to compete now, while still thinking about the future. As talks and speculation continued to grow, what made this situation even more interesting was how quickly the narrative shifted from simple rumors to serious discussion. Once teams begin evaluating contract structures, salary implications, and roster fit, it usually means things are moving beyond speculation. In this case, reports started suggesting that the Raiders were seriously considering the idea of bringing in a veteran quarterback to stabilize their offense, and Cousins naturally became one of the central names in those conversations. From a strategic perspective, it makes sense. Pairing a veteran quarterback with a developing roster, or even a future rookie quarterback, creates a transition path that many successful franchises use. It allows the team to stay competitive in the short term, while still preparing for the long term, without forcing a young quarterback into pressure too early. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the situation was becoming more complicated emotionally and structurally. When a team invests in a quarterback,
at the level of expectation that came with Cousins, moving away from that plan is never simple. There are financial implications, cap considerations, and the challenge of reshaping the offensive identity once again. But the NFL is a league that moves fast, and teams that hesitate too long to adjust often fall behind. That is why, once the possibility of change becomes real, it tends to accelerate quickly rather than slow down. Coaches and front offices begin preparing contingency plans, and players themselves become aware that the future might not look the same as the present. As all of this unfolds, the Raiders emerge more and more as a potential landing spot, not just because of need, but because of timing. Timing in the NFL is everything. A team that is ready to win now, but lacks quarterback stability, will always be aggressive when an experienced option becomes available. And a veteran quarterback looking for a new opportunity often values structure, coaching stability, and a clear role within the offense. That combination is what makes this situation so intriguing, because both sides seem to be aligning at the exact moment where change becomes possible. Right now, nothing is officially finalized in every detail, but the direction of the story is clear enough that the entire NFL community is watching closely. When a move like this starts gaining momentum, it rarely disappears without something happening. Either the deal gets confirmed, or the situation evolves into something even bigger, involving multiple roster decisions. What is certain is that this is no longer just a normal rumor cycle. This is a developing NFL storyline involving a veteran quarterback, a franchise searching for identity, and another franchise trying to build a competitive future. The moment rumors around Kirk Cousins started to feel real, the entire NFL conversation shifted. What was once just speculation suddenly turned into serious front office discussion. And once that happens in football, there is usually no turning back. Teams don't waste time exploring quarterback situations unless they are preparing for a possible move. And that's exactly why the Las Vegas Raiders quickly became the center of attention. For years, the Raiders have been stuck in a cycle of searching for stability at the most important position in football. Different quarterbacks have come and gone, different coaching ideas have been tested, but the one thing that never fully arrived was long-term certainty under center. That is why the idea of bringing in a veteran like Kirk Cousins immediately stood out as something more than just a random rumor. Inside the Raiders organization, the priority has quietly been about building a roster that can compete right now, while also preparing for the future. That balance is extremely difficult in the NFL, because if you focus too much on development, you risk losing games today. And if you focus only on winning now, you risk having no future foundation. This is where a quarterback like Cousins becomes valuable in a very specific way. He is not a rookie who needs time to learn, and he is not a long-term unknown. He is a proven starter who can walk into an offense and immediately operate at a professional level. That type of profile is exactly what teams look for when they feel they are close to being competitive, but still missing one final piece. As discussions continued behind the scenes, the financial side of everything also started to become a major factor. In the NFL, quarterback contracts are never simple, especially when a veteran with a history of big deals is involved. Teams have to consider guaranteed money, salary cap flexibility, and how the contract structure impacts future roster building. That is why reports around Cousins were not just about whether he would move, but how any potential deal would be structured. Short-term veteran contracts, incentive-based deals, and cap adjustments all started to become part of the conversation. And when contract details start being discussed publicly, it usually means negotiations are getting much closer to reality. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the tone of the situation began to feel different. What started as performance questions slowly turned into organizational planning. Every franchise eventually reaches a point where it has to decide whether to continue building around its current quarterback or start shifting resources toward a new direction. That decision is never made instantly, but once the internal conversation reaches a certain level, the entire direction of the team can change in a matter of weeks. Coaches begin adjusting schemes, Front offices begin evaluating draft options, and player development strategies start to shift toward the future rather than the present. For Kirk Cousins himself, this kind of situation is not unfamiliar in the NFL. Veteran quarterbacks often find themselves at the center of transition moments for franchises, especially when teams are trying to balance winning now with rebuilding for later. The pressure in those situations is different from a typical starting role, because every game becomes part performance and part evaluation. Every throw, every drive, every outcome gets analyzed, not just for what it means today, but for what it signals about tomorrow. That is why situations like this tend to move quickly once momentum builds, because uncertainty in the NFL rarely lasts long. As the Raiders continued to evaluate their options, one thing became clear. If they made a move for Cousins, it would not be just about filling a temporary gap. It would be about setting a direction for the entire offense. A veteran quarterback changes how a team approaches play calling, leadership, and even draft strategy. It can influence which young players develop faster, which offensive schemes are prioritized, and how aggressive a team becomes in close games. That level of impact is why quarterback decisions are always the most important decisions in football. At the same time, the broader NFL world began reacting strongly to the possibility. Fans started debating whether Cousins still had enough left to lead a competitive team. Analysts started comparing his recent performance trends with other veteran quarterbacks who changed teams later in their careers. Social media amplified every rumor, every report, and every hint of movement. And in the middle of all that noise, both the Falcons and the Raiders found themselves in a situation where silence was no longer possible, because every day without confirmation only increased speculation. The most important part of this entire situation is timing. In the NFL, timing can define careers, reshape franchises, and change expectations overnight. If the Raiders finalize a move, it instantly reshapes their quarterback identity. If Atlanta fully moves on, it signals the beginning of a new chapter for their roster. And if negotiations slow down, the entire story shifts again into uncertainty, waiting for the next development. Right now, everything is still building toward a decision point. Nothing is fully locked, but everything feels like it is moving in that direction. And in football, when a story reaches this stage, the next update is usually the one that changes everything completely. The NFL world is watching closely, because whatever happens next